So we don't know a lot at this point. Ukrainians were relieved at the choice of Secretary of State and also at the National Security Advisor. Both Rubio and the congressman are internationalists. And the congressman in particular, the future National Security Advisor, Mr. Waltz, has a strong record on Ukraine. His votes have been good for his record. He's met with Ukrainian soldiers. He gets it. So I think Ukraine felt a huge sense of relief at those two appointments.
What does Pete Hegseth specifically bring to the effort, knowing that he's looking to house clean at the Pentagon? We can attack this from a couple of different ways here, Melinda. Foggy Bottom is one, the State Department. The other, though, is the Pentagon itself and the promise to fire scores of generals. What would that mean for intelligence sharing, for strategic gathering when it comes to Ukraine?
Hey, Joe, I think the Pentagon nomination is one that gives people a lot of pause right now. It's not very clear what this gentleman would bring to the table in terms of his managerial chops. When you zoom in and look at Ukraine, the Pentagon has been critical in making sure that all of the weapons that Congress has appropriated get there on time. And this gentleman seems to be occupied with a lot of domestic concerns. So I think the foreign policy crowd in Washington is very skeptical of this nominee.
Okay, so if we're looking at potential areas in which there is concern over those who will be in the incoming Trump administration in the U.S., Melinda, is there going to be the ability to make up for that in other allies around the world? Is Europe going to be able to step in where the U.S. might not? Or is there really no hope for Ukraine if U.S. military and financial backing does not continue?
There's always hope, and there's always hope for Ukraine because Ukrainians are determined, and this is an existential fight. So even though some of the current nominees raise more than an eyebrow, give me anxiety at night, pick whatever analogy you like, they are not confirmed. They may not make it through the confirmation process. And the attitude in Kiev is a lot chiller than it is here in Washington. Their attitude is, we can work with anyone. We will find the right argument and we will make the case because Ukraine must have assistance. And Europe is stepping up. Europe has been freaking out for the last week. And they realize that they haven't put their defensive lines in place. They haven't stepped up manufacturing to the extent that they need to. And I think they're finally freaking out. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing for European security. It's a good thing for U.S. taxpayers as well.
Talk to us, Melinda, about what is being prepared for shipment, whether it's money or material, military gear. What does the administration have left that it is so determined to send over before January?
Yeah, Joe, this is the really important question. So Jake Sullivan, the current national security advisor, has said that the $5.5 billion remaining on the books will be in Kiev by January 20th. It will be Trump-proofed. Now, I've been making some phone calls and talking to people on Capitol Hill, and that's not what I'm hearing and seeing. According to some of the conversations I've had, Joe, only 20 to 25% of that kit that the Ukrainians really need, and it's very hard now, will arrive by January 20th. So apparently the White House decided to put this military equipment on to ship it by sea rather than to fly it in. So this is a big problem, and I hope the White House can speed it up because Ukrainians are depending on it.
Well, let's talk about something else Ukraine is dependent on, because wars are not just fought with actual ammunition and weapon. They're fought with information and the ability to communicate. And I wonder, Melinda, what your reaction is to the role we are seeing Elon Musk now play in his closeness to the president-elect, the role he will serve, we understand, as the co-head of the Department of Government Efficiency, knowing that he has the power to influence the operations of Starlink, and according to reporting, has even discussed that matter with Vladimir Putin.
Right. So this is a relationship that I'm going to continue to watch. We don't know how it's going to evolve, but the fact that Musk is involved in the conversations over Russia and Ukraine means that it's important and that it will be an elevated issue in the early days in the Trump administration. So unfortunately, I don't think we can speculate much more beyond that. It's something I'm watching.
Melinda, if Donald Trump's idea of ending this war on day one includes a settlement that gives Russia all of the occupied territory that it's taken, from the Donbass all the way down through Crimea, does he have a willing partner in President Zelensky, or is that a deal breaker?
So I don't know. So right now Zelensky is saying no territory, but the
Yeah.
conversation in Kiev has switched from territory, Joe, to security guarantees. And I think that's the area where the Ukrainians are not going to give whatsoever. They've said even if we freeze the conflict now, even if there's some kind of DMZ zone, we know that the Russians will come back at us, and we can't live in peace. This is not this is not a just peace. And it's interesting that Donald Trump has used the phrase just peace. It's also interesting. So Trump made a lot of promises. There's a lot of campaign rhetoric. He said that he will end the war in 24 hours. I'm sorry, that's not possible, but it's instructive to go back and look at his record. So when he pulled out of the Iran deal, it took them 16 months to do it. So I think Donald Trump is likely to find out that he makes these big, bold promises, but the actual implementation is quite sticky. And he's not going to want to put himself, especially in the early days in his administration, in a weak footing. If he were to freeze aid on January 20th, there's going to be egg all over the United States face, and the Chinese are watching us and what we're doing in Ukraine. I don't think Donald Trump can afford that, and I think he is probably going to pivot back to a Reagan-esque theme of peace through strength.
As we consider what's actually happening in Ukraine now, Melinda, obviously there has been in the last several weeks a lot of focus on the fact that North Koreans are now involved in this conflict. What actually has that done to change conditions on the ground and the actual operations and abilities of Russia and the way in which Ukraine has to respond?
Kaylee, it's making the infusion of these 10,000 North Korean troops up in Kursk Oblast is making it more difficult for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are short on men and shells right now, and the pressure is really on. Is it decisive? No, but it increases the pressure, and it's also winter, and the winter season is going to be hard, cold, and brutal, and I expect pretty severe blackouts if the Russians continue their missile strikes, which they have been over the past week.
You know, we're assuming as a premise of this conversation, Melinda, and maybe rightfully so, I guess that's my question. Should we assume that this new Congress, with Republican control of both the House and Senate, would not approve any further funding for Ukraine?
Joe, I'm not willing to concede that yet. So there was a lot of hope for a supplemental bill, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen in this lame duck period. But look, you and I have had lots of conversations about Speaker Mike Johnson. He cares about Ukraine. He cares about the Christians that are being persecuted by Russia there. He has personal relationships with a lot of Ukrainians, and he knows what's at stake. And a majority of Republicans still support Ukraine. So I'm definitely not giving up on Congress. There's bipartisan support for Ukraine on Capitol Hill, even in Trump's second term in office.
Well, I guess we'll see if that bipartisan nature is enough to get things over the finish line in this upcoming Congress when there's a lot domestically that they want to get done. Melinda, President Biden is about to make another trip overseas, one of his last as president. He's going to be meeting with Xi Jinping tomorrow on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Peru. He'll then be heading to the G20 in Brazil. How do you think Ukraine is going to factor into the conversations that will be had over the course of the next several days?
So I know that Taiwan and many other allies in the Pacific are watching to see if America will live up to its promise. We've made a lot of promises on Ukraine, and our actions have a big and resounding impact, particularly in Asia. So I think that our actions are being watched very carefully, and that's sort of what I expect to see and be a focus of that discussion.
Melinda,